startup jobs bill signed into law last month is one of a few bipartisan success stories in Congress this year. Now, the same senators who introduced that bill are trying to make it 2 for 2 with what they're calling the Startup Act 2.0. Democratic Virginia Senator Mark Warner and Republican Kansas Senator Jerry Moran join me now. All right, well, let me give you both a chance to make your pitch for this bill. Senator Warner, you start. What's the basics? Why do we need to be hurrying up and passing this bill versus, say, focusing on the tax issue that's coming up in 7 months?
Well, Chuck, Jerry and I are both new here, and we didn't get the memo that you're supposed to take presidential election years off. And we both understand that, you got to grow jobs in this country. And data has shown that 80% of all the new jobs created in the last 20 years came from startup ventures. So the first bill we worked on together, the so-called Jobs Act, was how do you get these startup companies access to capital, ability to go public, raise money over the internet. The next bill we're working on, Startup Act 2.0, is how do we get access to talent? How do we make sure that world-class talent that we oftentimes train in our universities and get those PhDs in engineering don't go home and start those jobs, but do it here, jobs that will be started here in America. Okay,
but you didn't use the word that is part of the problem here. Senator Moran, isn't the issue frankly have to do with our unsolved immigration issue and the politics of immigration?
Well, it is. I mean, this is a difficult bill. Anytime you deal with immigration, it's a serious problem. But here's my point. I would guess that 80% of my colleagues in the Senate and the House agree with what we're trying to do here, agree with the provisions of this legislation. And over you hear, well, we can't do anything with immigration unless we do everything with immigration. Our point is, let's do the things that we can agree upon. And don't use that as an excuse that we've got to do everything. Let's do what we can do. And the result, I mean, the reason that this is important now is our country can't wait for economic growth, can't wait for job creation, can't wait for us to become the next European country that's in financial problems. We need to create job security, good paying jobs in the United States. And in the process of doing that, we'll also, the added benefit is we'll have our deficit reduced because the growing economy puts revenues into the tax coffers.
So is it, let me just get this straight. So is the basic premise here, if you get a graduate degree and you're not a U.S. citizen, you get a graduate degree at a U.S. university, you get a visa to stay here and work? Is that
Chuck,
right, Senator Warner?
Chuck, there's two pieces of it. One is, and we've heard this from technology companies for years, staple that green card or a visa to those graduate degrees, PhDs and others in science, technology, engineering, and math, where candidly we're not training enough American students. I'd love for there to be more American-born students, but we're not. So why do you then have the Microsofts of the world set up the research institutes in China? Do it here if we can keep those students here. The second part is, if somebody then who's been on one of these visas wants to start a business here, show they can raise capital, hire American workers, do it here rather than sending them home.
All right, both of you wanted to come on together, show some bipartisanship. Senator Moran, though, I want you to react to something that a potential colleague of yours said to me just 10 days ago. Take a listen.
I certainly think that bipartisanship ought to consist of Democrats coming to the Republican point of view. We entered this campaign wanting to be a voice and hoping to give more of a national voice to the idea that Republicans, and more specifically conservatives, would be in the majority of the United States Senate and the House, and hopefully that we have a Republican in the White House. If we do that, bipartisanship means they have to come our way.
Senator Moran, are you comfortable? That was Richard Murdoch. He's the Republican nominee in Indiana. Is that starting to become the growing view of more and more Republican senators?
Chuck, look, I mean, half the people who call my office in Washington, D.C. will say, why can't Senator Moran work with others and get something done? The other half will call and say, why can't Senator Moran just hold his feet to the fire and not budge 1 inch? And both of those points of view are right. There are things in which we ought not budge very far, and there are things we ought to be working on together. And what Senator Warner and I, Senator Rubio, Senator Coons have come up with is something that certainly fits that category of broad support. Don't let the issues in which there are differences, legitimate differences by people who have different philosophies, come from different places across the country, different constituents, don't let those things permeate the whole conversation of Washington, D.C. Work together on what we can.
Senator Moran, do you think Mr. Murdoch is just a little naive? Hang on, Senator Warner. Do you think he's a little naive on how the process works?
Well, it all depends on what he's talking about. There are certain things that, I mean, I would love to see more Democrats support Republican positions, and I assume Mark would like to see more
right.
Republicans do the reverse. But the point here is it all depends on what the issues are. Fight for what you believe in, but recognize that not everybody is going to agree on everything.
Chuck,
Senator Warner, I want to ask you about all of this talk about private equity. If you don't mind, I want to sort of hit you both here with politics.
Let me just weigh in on Murdoch for a second. I think what he said is wacky. You know, the genius of our founders was they set up a slightly dysfunctional government. Independent House, independent Senate, independent president. You got to find common ground if you're going to get anything done.
Well, they didn't write the rules on the filibuster, though, until much 100 years later or so. Senator Warner, I want to ask you about you're a man who made a lot of money in the private sector. Are you comfortable with President Obama's, the campaign's attacks on Bain Capital? Do you think it's an attack on private equity?
Listen, I think I'm very proud of my business experience. I was more on the early stage venture capital. But one of the things I found as I made the transition to public service, there is a different skill set. Oftentimes, if you're doing, got investors, you're looking for short-term profits. If you're in public service, if you're investing in preschool, if you're investing in long-term infrastructure, you got a much different time horizon. There is a different skill set, and I think it's a valid topic of debate.
Do you think Bain Capital was practiced good or bad ethics here in the way they went about their business?
I think Bain Capital was a very successful business. I think they got a good return for their investors. That is what they were supposed to do. I think that when you're in public life, though, what you've got is a different time horizon. The notion that everything in government is exactly the same way that it is in business, there are different time horizons when you've got to invest for the long haul, when you've got to actually do the kind of early stage investing, whether it's in preschool, whether it's in K-12, whether it's in infrastructure that don't pay back quarter to quarter.
And Senator Moran, since Senator Warner jumped in on your political question, you want to jump in on his political question there?
I just would say that, I mean, the Startup Act that we're talking about, what we know about the entrepreneurship in this country is there's going to be some successes and some failures. There's no guarantees in this country. Government is not to guarantee the success of a company, and the private sector needs to work. It's where we're going to create the jobs that this country and its citizens so desperately need.
Senators Mark Warner, Democrat from Virginia, Jerry Moran, Republican from Kansas. Thanks for coming on together this morning. I appreciate it.
Chuck.
Thanks, Chuck.
All right. Well, despite